So I've lived in the States for 3.5 years. I've been training people for 8 years. I started 8 years ago in Sweden. I trained in inclusive practices and kind of anti-bias trainings for folks that run refugee centers and centers for immigrants. So I started in Sweden, and then it kind of spread to like Helsinki in Finland, the Netherlands and Germany, and I did it around Germany. I was living in Berlin, and I was teaching at the Alice Solomon College of Social Work, doing this specific topic around inclusion and anti-racism. So that's my work in Europe, and then I ended up doing it in New Zealand and Australia and a bunch of other places. And I lived here in the 3.5 years I've lived in the States, I've trained people from over 100 organizations in Oregon and Washington. So that's my past, and currently I sit at an interesting spot where I'm training like arts organizations, media organizations, and social work, and like even like TriMet, corrections, and retail. So like a bunch of different sectors. But the questions are always the same and the issues are always the same. So that's why I do that. And my day job, my proper day job is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Manager at Impact Northwest, which is one of the Oregon's oldest nonprofits and serves over 36,000 people a year. So that's me. I have a lot of things to say if people ask the right questions. It just depends on what you ask. So does anyone, do people want to tell me who they are and what they do? That might help me contextualize things too. So Becky, do you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. I'm Becky. I go by she, they pronouns, and I am the development director at KBOO. But I also work in a number of other media organizations, Reform Portland, Oregon Community Media, and I'll be co-hosting the Grassroots Radio Conference.
I'm Monica Weitzel. I'm the Director of Community Relations at Metro East Community Media in Gresham. I also host and co-produce a weekly TV talk show where I interview just nonprofits.
Cool. So I just connected with Seth already. So.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Go ahead, sweet.
Okay, I gotta have the words ready.
Yeah.
My name is Nan Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
I help with, and I represent KEPW, LPFM, KEPW.org in Eugene. For those of you who don't know where Eugene is, it's 2 hours south of here. I live in Montana, so I have these hats, and I produce a radio show podcast that I call Light Radio.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Nan.
Welcome.
I'm Ashley Gerber. I work at CCTV in Salem. I'm the media instructor and kind of morphing into outreach, and I run our summer camps and do everything they tell me to. It's expanding as we go.
Cool.
My name is Kira Flitter, and I'm also at CCTV. I'm the programming and promotion coordinator, so I manage our channel content, manage social media, teach our orientation class, work with some of our volunteers and producers.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Shelly Ostrowski. I work at WFMC Studios, and I'm an executive assistant, and I do finance and some HR stuff.
Where is that?
William Falls Media Center.
Oh, that's William Falls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
I'm Melody Ashford, and I'm Executive Director at William Falls Media Center, but I also we're a very small staff, so I do production and whatever they tell me to.
The way of nonprofits.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Matt Schuster, Executive Director of Public Media Network, and we're starting to look at all of our policies, procedures, the way we do business to ensure that we don't have implicit bias built into things, and then that we're not creating unintentional barriers to participation.
Okay. So say that one more time. What's your position again?
My position is Executive Director.
Okay. And what is
So one of the things we're starting to look at in our goals for strategic planning is to review all of how we do everything that we do to ensure that we don't have implicit bias built into.
What is it that you'll do?
We're a community media center, so we offer training, workshops, programming opportunities, access to equipment.
Cool. We're just doing intros, so you're just in time. So you can just,
Yeah.
Hi.
You have to say who you are.
Okay. My name is Dustin Hart. I'm the Executive Director of Inception.
Cool. Sweet. Hello. So I just did my intro, so don't worry. My name's Annavo. Okay, so several things. As an artist and as an audio engineer, also I'm like always looking at things from the side of the person who's trying to live their life and learn things and survive as an artist or whatever. So I'm constantly working at all levels, and what that means is I'm working one-on-one with people in my organization, supporting them in the ways they need to be supported as people of color or as people who are marginalized. So I'm constantly doing one-on-one work. At the same time, I'm doing procedural work, like you mentioned. And then I'm also doing organizational transparency, decision-making, financial, so also helping people understand how the financial decisions and other things are happening, because part of inclusion or equity or whatever is about feeling like you matter and feeling like you have a voice and that you are really a member of the community as much as anybody else is a member of the community. So I want to say that it's multi-pronged and it's multi-tiered, and it's never just one thing. Like, you can't just change a word and that affect people, and you can't just change people and that affect the word. So yeah, I would love it if anyone had any questions, especially if they had specific interventions that they wanted to address, and if not, I can also keep talking.
I don't have a specific intervention,
Yep.
but I have, I kind of have a charge within my board leadership at Freeform Portland.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for us to figure out a way to bring in that procedural piece
Okay.
from an equity standpoint, but also transparency is something that our community members who are people of color, who have varying intersecting oppressions, want from us in how we're approaching that work as well.
Okay.
And so that's not even really a place to start, but it is.
It makes sense. I think Freeform is an interesting example because it's made up of different cells and different kind of chunks that all kind of make up one amalgam of programming or of a group of people. So I think specifically with any organization that has silos and different people doing their own thing and maybe not much connection across, is having the opportunity to actually meet and to get to know each other across the programs and across the shows. So one, building in that so that people know what each person is doing, and then getting to know their needs as a group. So as a community, as an individual, but also as a community. And specifically what you're talking about is building in mechanisms to get very specific feedback. And I feel like that's always the onus, and the responsibility is always on leadership to do that. And I think the way that some nonprofits or other things work is that we kind of do the thing and it's reactive, but not very forward planning, and then someone just said that we should change something, as opposed to being forward planning, having your feelers out and say what might happen, what might go wrong, what are we not doing well right now, and how do we grab that information and grab that temperature check before anything goes wrong. So being really sensitive and also paying attention to the humans that make up your group. But yeah, I think the first step of getting to know the people that make up your group is actually having a chance to meet. Do you all have
We have a monthly volunteer meeting for everybody, but that location has been shifting, and I think that might be a barrier for folks. But
is there buy-in? Do people always come?
Yeah, we have typically 40 to 100 people every time coming to those. So yeah, but I think we could do more and better in that way.
Yeah, because 40 means that at a low point, there's low points, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so building in a structure, and it's interesting moving to the States and seeing how metrics are gathered and how people need to, send out surveys so that there is some proof that something is working or not working. And it's weird to think of people and human experiences in terms of satisfied, extremely satisfied, or not at all.
Yeah.
So
that's it.
right. Yeah. Right. So how do you get that information that you want without reducing it to that transaction, basically? Right. So structure. I would recommend structuring a very fun, very nice, interactive family kind of gathering that also gets that information.
Okay.
Do Do you
Yeah.
have examples of ways, or can you get back to us or give us resources to go to find ways to do that? So we opened a second location in the Rockwood neighborhood, which our demographic is mostly immigrant and refugee population there. That's who we're really kind of working with mostly, and they we want to start an advisory board for that location so that we can actually have people from the community that that we're serving be on that board and helping us to form policies and go forward.
Yeah.
But we need to do, we're told that we need to do our community needs assessment. We need to go out and actually get information. And just the idea of doing the satisfactory, unsatisfactory, it's just so dry and so.
Yeah, needs assessments are interesting when they exclude undocumented folks and houseless folks, and there is absolutely zero strategy to actually listen to voices for folks that don't have addresses, Right.
Right.
So there's a couple of pieces there, especially language, not just what language you're using, like what community languages are you not speaking as a staff, but also the type of language you're using as opposed, like stakeholders as opposed to visitor or like, so even when you get that information, often people are just so caught up in nonprofit jargon that their thing that they're asking isn't accessible.
Means nothing, maybe.
Yeah, it's like.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of meeting the stakeholders in the community and meeting the people that are really representing each group. I mean, we're doing our workshops are in about 8 different languages. The 8 top languages. Of course, there's a lot of other ones there too. But we still, as far as using nonprofit language and trying to ask questions that will actually give us information we need, that means something to them. That's hard to know where to begin.
Yeah, and I think advisory boards and committees and certain advisory bodies, especially when you're asking free labor from community members who don't have time or money anyway, I think the model of those can be a little bit flawed in the sense of what are you offering the people that you're inviting. So not just saying make a meal, whatever, but hot food helps, but specifically free childcare, specifically what if they come, what is the long term result, or how are they building themselves as people and as a family or as a community if they come to your
Well, we've been doing digital literacy classes, and we've been free with free childcare and free food.
Totally.
And so we'll continue to do that, and that's been really well accepted. And that's how and then from there we get to know the kids and the families, and then they come to our other classes, which is great.
Yeah.
But can we form a committee of or an advisory board, and then have them help us create that needs assessment?
Yeah, and yes and no, and that makes sense. I think what I'm trying to say is that I would urge you to reframe this idea of one institution, one monolith or whatever, and then people kind of bringing people in so that they can make the monolith prettier, as opposed to this is a monolith, you have all these access, you have all these resources, how can you then funnel the resources that you have directly to the people that you're asking to be involved. So it's specifically passing on and giving away access and power and resources very tangibly, so that there is an exchange and it's mutually beneficial for people to even come into your building or to your advisory board. So and in general, that's what partnerships, that's how partnerships should look, as opposed to any dominating organization. Totally. And I think it's complicated. I think it depends on the needs of your particular community. I can't speak to that. But I would be what do people need help with right now? Are we getting into winter or summer? Summer, okay. Yeah. But if we were going into winter and there was housing that needed help with winterization, that's just very basic. What is?
We're looking at
you look,
those,
good. Yeah, you look around and you go.
We have some other community partners that we're talking about getting some help with helping people winterize, or to helping helping them get we can help them get low cost internet service so they can actually use their computers that we taught them how to use.
Yeah.
And we gave them computers too.
Cool, yeah. So in Build with all of those types of things is about leaving the site and going. And I'm sorry if I repeat anything I said from the last session. I'll try not to, but just in case I do, sorry. But it's about leaving your site and leaving the safety of your castle or whatever, in the ivory tower, whatever, and being I'll help you fix your pothole or build your roof or whatever, but actually going to communities and doing even classes and stuff out there. What was I going to say? I think I've forgotten. But so it's again remapping how the services where they are and how they look. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I would argue always that every effective service or program, anything is about building really good relationships and really strong relationships that are sustained, that last, and they can last. The dynamics can change, and someone can be a client or a visitor, and they can become a worker, and they can become the board or whatever. So the dynamics can always change, but we're talking about building long-lasting connections and relationships to those communities, even if they leave that physical geographic community. This city is small enough that you see the same people again and again, and people can remain accountable, as opposed to it's a one-off transaction and you never see that person again. So yeah, I would look again at how to prolong and build really rich relationships with the people that you want to have around, and what they need. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
My name is John Hamilton. I'm the interim general manager at Chaos Radio at Evergreen in Olympia.
Cool. Louis was just on the panel with me last, so cool. Sweet. So yeah, we're just talking about better outreach, better partnership, better mutually beneficial, etc. But better kind of systems or alternative systems, as opposed to what a traditional model or a traditional system might look for any organization in order to be inclusive. So we mentioned language a little bit. We mentioned kind of geographical adaptability. Does anyone else have any specific questions? Does anyone have questions about engaging a staff, or because I work with 400 staff members, and that's most of my work is kind of trying to serve the community that we do have in order to make sure they don't feel like they need to leave, or that they don't feel like they fit in, etc. So does anyone have questions about valuing staff or
What does
engaging?
that look like for you?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about you engaging a staff in order to be able to better serve the communities they serve, right?
Yeah. So there's a few things that, one is mentorship and self-development and professional development. So in a lot of work cultures, self-care is not really valued, and or kind of people's humanity is not really valued as staff or as a visitor or as a client. So starting off with saying okay, we're trying again to build human relationships with each other so that we can see who people are in their entirety, as opposed to just their function or their service that they provide. So we as an agency definitely constantly talk about building really strong relationships with our clients, and building in time and space to take breaks, to debrief, to have meetings, to go for walks, but constantly building out the quality time that we have in between the service time. So that's kind of one tiny part of it, and the other part of it is everyone wants to grow and learn. No one wants to just stay the same and do the same thing forever and ever and ever. So instead of kind of thinking of things as a tree, and then you get to the branch of the tree and that's the end, nothing else happens after that. I try to think about how do we change. Not all roles need to be static. Not all positions need to be the same position forever. If that person really wants to go over to development, or that person really wants to, how do we adapt to the person's needs? So how do we change the work culture and the roles and responsibilities and their position and all that stuff to serve them as an individual, as opposed to just kicking out that individual and popping a different person in their place, right? So again, systems should not be prioritized over people, and we should be valuing people, and not just that, but what they want. How do we keep them around? We look at how they want to advance as a person and how we can accommodate them, and if they want to learn more stuff. So I have a really rigorous training plan. I have 16 trainings that I run, and it's on repeat all the time. It's free for anyone, and then people just come. So it includes grant writing, mental health first aid, de-escalation, bystander intervention, a bunch of different things that I'm trying to give people knowledge so that they can feel better about they're not just stuck in like a place without like learning stuff. And then in addition to that, people have also come in and said, like, hey, something that I hadn't thought of, and then usually I'll find someone else to facilitate it. So I'm also teaching people facilitation skills and empowering them to keep teaching other people that stuff. So anyway, my point is that I'm looking at individual people and how they can grow as individuals within, instead of feeling like they're trapped in their position, but kind of taking that away and being like, well, that's just imaginary, that's just a label, that doesn't mean you have to be in that label. We can change your label, or we can change how that looks, or where you are, or where your office is, or who you're working with, or what you're doing. Like, that's all malleable. So yeah, I wanted to mention that because I think we come from the like Industrial Revolution, like produce, segment the company, segment the industry, and then have everyone just like take care of one chunk. But remember that that's just a system that was put in place. It doesn't mean that you can't take it away and just remember what the general purpose is. Go ahead.
So are these training opportunities that you're talking about, is this something you would provide to other nonprofits?
Yeah, I've trained over 100
so like
organizations.
I can staff that, because we're a nonprofit here, so
Yeah.
we only have 5 staff members.
Yeah.
I would love to take advantage of some of this.
Yeah,
Do
just
you have
email
any
me.
funds? Oh,
So just
great.
add
Yeah,
Impact
email me.
Northwest.
Yeah, AVO at impactnorthwest.org.
Okay.
I don't have business cards on principle, but that's my email address. But yeah, of course, because
Do you
I'm.
do this at your location, or do you come out to?
I do. I go out to.
You go out to other.
Yeah, just wherever
Okay.
people need. That's part of my model, right? But yeah, so that's one section, is valuing the individual, and then we have their relationships and their dynamics, and being like, okay, now how do they sit into this space? Is the space culture, is the work culture, or the dominant cultural culture squeezing or oppressing these people in a way that they don't want to be here? So you have the individual, but then you have the individual in a context, and in any non-culturally specific organization, there is a dominant culture. And sometimes that can be suffocating, or sometimes that can be mediated. It depends on the department. So then my position is also trying to figure out how to change P&P and how to change very clear organizational stuff to make the culture different, so that people don't feel like they're walking into a place where they don't belong, and that they're going to have a very short time span of being there, which is very real. So that's part of it. And then you have societal, and so it's kind of like individual, the relationship or the work culture, and making sure that people have time to take breaks and look after someone. They don't feel like the pressure to produce some kind of outcome. And then you have the organization, the entire organization, and communication and decision making and transparency and flows of power and flows of finance and all this stuff. And then how we push back as an organization. How do we then influence laws, budget forum, things that are actually directly affecting our houseless folks and our undocumented, like all the people that we're trying to serve. There's housing, there's a housing crisis. There's all these crises that we as an institution have power to leverage around that. So that's the next step of what I'm doing, at least. I've only been in this position for 2.5 months, just so you know. I've done all this, and this is all happening, and that's great. One thing, I horizontalized decision making, so that there's a very clear decision making model, that it's not just top down, and people have, there's feedback mechanisms. So that's one of the things that I did organizationally. And then two, on the first week I made like a huge, and I don't think the internet is the answer to anything, but I just put it out there. I made a huge website and it's public, so you can have a look at it. But it has like 30 resources. One of them is like how white culture shows up in organizations, including bureaucracy and application forms and stuff. And then how like microaggressions work and what they are and how they live. But like having just 27 or 30 very clear guides to culturally responsive onboarding. How do you outreach and look for certain people for certain roles if you are trying to be more diverse, etc. So resources, and then my training stuff, and then external resources like translation. Like I found like PSU, there's just this list of phone numbers. It's online if you want it. But if you need someone who speaks Swahili, there's just their phone number, you can call them, and then they translate a document. It's really cool. But it was a matter of Googling, like I said in the last session. I just Googled a lot of it and I just shoved it in the website, and then I gave it to everyone. Everyone's like, this is amazing. And I'm like, this has always been here. It's just that no one Googled it, you know, until I started this position. Go ahead.
What's the website, please?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, details.
Impactnw.org.
Oh, it's on that? It's
Yeah,
on that website?
yeah.
Okay.
/about-us. Oh, yeah. nw.org /about-us about-us/DEI. And then there's a bunch of stuff in there.
And so if I was going to, sorry, if I was going to type in,
Yeah.
So for us, it was coming up with.
if I was not going to do it that way, or
Yeah.
if I was going to do it two different ways, one, try this way to make sure I had it right, or just type in,
Type in Anna Vo, type in my name and Impact Northwest, it'll come up.
how do you spell your name?
Anna, A-N-N-A, V-O.
V-O?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. You know, the reason I put it in a public, I could have put it on our like intranet, but I purposely put it in a public space because I want knowledge to be shared and I want it's not proprietary in any way. And then what else was I going to say? The website. I think I've forgotten. Anyway, so in general, like mediating, and I think it's sometimes a little bit like almost sometimes you're trying to predict things, but I definitely have had to just come in and be like, I have a feeling that this is what you think of this, of working here, and I have a feeling that there might be a conflict soon. What do you think about that? And they're like, yes. So I'm like, cool. Let's figure it out before you leave, or before there is a conflict, or before you feel like you have to make a grievance or something. So that's part of it is too, is a little bit of clairvoyance. But it's, you know, it's not from nowhere. It's because institutional oppression is real, and you can see it. You can see in people's faces. You can see when someone comes into work and they have just read the news about Waffle House or whatever for the last week, and they come in and they're like, I don't want to be here because my people are getting killed every freaking day. So, you know, this is a reality. Something I said this morning? I was at a panel this morning? No, last night. At the RAC panel that I moderated last night, when someone, one of the artists said something about the history of Oregon, and I was like, if you live here, you need to know. If you don't already know, please look it up. If you live in Oregon or Portland, you need to know about how anti-black it has been from the very beginning of its initiation, and you need to know about how the Portland police are constantly still, even the things that aren't reported are still, murdering people in their homes or their families' homes. So my point is, if you're living somewhere, you need to know about where you live, because obviously that's going to produce the dynamics that you work in and the people that you work with, right? And part of understanding humanity is understanding what people are going through at all times. So like, if you work with someone and you know that their community right now has, an executive order has just come out and their family is threatened because they're undocumented, that's something that hopefully you would know as their colleague or as a responsible social worker. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that this conversation isn't just about, equity obviously isn't just about race, ethnicity, cultural framework. It is, and it's also about like people who are undocumented, houseless. It's about class, it's about ability, it's about being trans, it's about any identity where you've had to suffer or be punished for it or be penalized for it. And that includes like being an immigrant or refugee, where you've come to the States, you've never been here before. Bye. Yeah. But yeah, so like thinking beyond like race and beyond like ethnicity and being like, okay, this person is a white immigrant, a white refugee who's come here. They don't speak the language. They don't know the social security system or all these other systems in place. So how do we build bridges to people who obviously wouldn't have any idea of these systems, because there's no rule book. When you come here, there's absolutely no possible way you could know anything unless you ask somebody that already knows it. So just thinking constantly about those bridges to build as well. there's
Or
a lot.
somebody reaches out to them and says, can I help you with this? You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
There are some like really good nonprofits that do that.
Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah, there's such a huge difference between waiting and expecting someone to come in to your service or calling your service versus being preventative and being like, okay, we know there's the Sudanese refugees in this neighborhood and they might not have reached out to anyone. Let's like, not door knock because that's not trauma informed either, but let's do something that's trauma informed in that neighborhood to know that there are resources for them, and that includes using the language that they speak, you know?
And also maybe trying to learn from them as well, not just
Of course.
imparting our great knowledge, but finding out.
Of course,
you know.
yeah, white savior complex is
Yeah.
super real, and any assumption that anyone knows more than anybody else what's good for somebody else is
Yeah.
completely ludicrous. So totally. Yes to all those things. Does anyone have any questions before I keep ranting? Okay, so the other thing that I haven't talked about is today we had our POC affinity group meeting in my organization. And the important thing is that it was a safe space, that I tried to make it a safe space, and again, I use that really loosely. What that means is a confidential space where the things they weren't going to say was going to be used in any retaliation kind of mode. So basically building a confidential safe space for employees of color to say these are the real problems, that we need to change our procedures and protocols, and we also need to self-reflect on our own practices because this is not working for our families. An example that wasn't from this meeting because that was confidential, but from a meeting last week was in our domestic violence center, how some people don't want to be pathologized. So for example, one of the therapists were like, let's be clinical. Being clinical is great. And then I'm like, is being clinical great? If someone's come in because of domestic violence, they want their kid placed at a new school, do they need to know about PTSD? Do they need to know that you've diagnosed them something? I don't think so. So again, understanding what diagnosis means, where that comes from, that's a white framework. It's from Western medicine and Western psychology. Does that help your client at all to know that they have PTSD, complex PTSD? Probably not. So again, looking at the systems that we have and looking at which ones actually serve the human interaction, and some of them that don't, you don't need to impart that. Especially if it's oppressive, especially if it restricts them or puts them in a box or makes them need to be systematized or criminalized later on. So kind of again, looking at what you're about to subject someone to. So anyway, I feel like I've talked a lot about social work. I guess, can I give the example of what I do at KBU?
Sure.
So at KBU for about a year, I've run the POC kind of caucus, and when it started, it was, yes, what does it stand for?
What's the POC stand for?
People of color. Sorry. It stands for, yeah. So I started a caucus, so a space for anyone that wasn't white in that radio station to talk about their experiences working at that radio station. And out of that first meeting, a lot of energy, a lot of very real things, was a list of I think 12 or 13 very clear recommendations for procedural changes. So, and I think my role in almost all of these different spaces is to translate someone saying something. So like you might say, this was weird to me, and I translate that into procedural change. That's like part of what I do because I'm very structural. So I'll be like, oh, you didn't like the intake form? Oh, you didn't want to do that online application form? Okay, let's put in a procedure that's optional, that we don't require this like very complex written thing for someone to be part of our, like, so if you're looking for interns or if you're looking for volunteers, but then they have to do a bajillion things in English English isn't their main language, but they might be amazing at tech and you'll never know because they never applied for your thing online. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Anyway, so building a monthly space where people can talk confidentially, but also have direct upward effect on the institution itself. And then again, having the second part of that is how can we use the institution to push up against other stuff that's happening in bigger institutions locally and not locally. Yeah, so support space for that, and then I also do the trainings for people who are not POC, so for white folks, and doing that, creating whatever safe means, a space for white folks to be able to ask questions like, why can't I be reverse racist? Like, what's wrong with reverse racism? Or like, why can't I tell someone to join my religion? Or like, like people can ask these questions, and I'm the one that I'm like, I've volunteered and get paid to be the person who does the work, the emotional work for that question or for those questions. So building up formal spaces that also doesn't necessarily, but can inform the institution itself.
So do you have situations where, it sounds like you talk to the two different groups. Do you have blended? So
Yes, there's accountable. So there should never be any white-only space that's not accountable to a space of color. Because then it's a bubble and there's no point to it.
I just remember, because you said you talk to this group and
Yes.
you talk to this group.
Yes.
So where do we?
Yes.
What is it called when you talk to both, or do you just keep both?
Sometimes there's an equity committee, for example. So people are like, let's start an equity committee. That is a group where both can bring back their stuff. In another organization I work at, A Call to Safety, it used to be called the Portland Women's Crisis Line. I run the domestic violence workers of color space there every month. And again, that doesn't just go to one organization, it goes to a lot of different. And I've had to then take a recommendation from there, call someone I've never ever spoken to before, and that's fine, that's my job. Be like, hi, I need to have a meeting with you, this is my name, this is what I do, and let's meet up. And then I go to the meeting, try to disarm them, so that they're not like super defensive, and then be like, so you're really racist, you've kicked out this black family, let's sort it out. Let's like figure this out, because you can't keep doing this for other domestic violence kind of clients, for example. So so again, what I said is like, if you have a reading group or an equity committee or whatever, that needs to be accountable, it means it has a responsibility to a group of people of color. You never have one without the other. And what that means is the other group can ask this group stuff, either to do stuff or to look at stuff or to think about stuff. Or else then they're just thinking about stuff because they feel like it, which is, again, not the definition of responsibility, right?
It just feels like the exchange is important.
Exchange, yeah, but I want to make sure there's a dynamic there of reparations, or of like, it's not it's not an equal dynamic, this one has a responsibility to the other one. So the group of white folks has a responsibility to the groups of folks of color, or people of color, to do what they've asked, because the structure was created in the first place to equalize previous oppressions and previous hierarchies. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm interested in, I wasn't part of the process. I think KBOO had a long-term approach long before I got there.
Yeah.
But within new community movements that are primarily white, how do you initiate equity committees without that tokenizing thing and putting a lot of emotional
So the equity
labor?
committees can be all white people too. It doesn't matter who's in it. An equity committee is literally a space to ask, to make people reflect on their own privileges, and also to think about how they can leverage their own power to change things, to make things more inclusive. Okay. That group can be anyone. But sometimes, if it was all white, then they might not have the perspectives and the ideas. Right. Yeah.
Just sometimes it feels like it. I mean, it would be good for us to ask any of the community members that are POC or experiencing any amount of intersection oppression, but
you can ask without tokenizing. So when you're doing that, you ask everybody at the same. So I was taught a long time ago, when, for example, teaching a classroom of kids, if one kid did something naughty, I don't shame them directly. I just talk to the whole class. So if one kid maybe borrowed the teacher's eraser and they weren't meant to, but then you saw it, but it was back on the desk or whatever. I would never be like, John, did you steal my eraser? I would be like, hey class, I just want to remind you all that that eraser is mine, and I'd rather you not use it. So we're not shaming or tokenizing or whatever. Similarly, if I wanted two people in this room specifically to join the equity committee, I wouldn't ask them directly. I'd be like, hi, we're at the All Staff. I want to remind you all to join the equity committee, right? Because that's not tokenizing. you know. But as soon as you go, I really want you actually.
Right,
Yeah.
Pay you.
Yeah. I use that as a general rule of thumb for a lot of the things I do, is not to out people, not to shame people, but to just address people as a group and make sure they're paying attention while I'm addressing them. There's a lot more here, but I was consulting with an organization around working with folks with disabilities, and the same thing, same advice was like, okay, do you have a space where folks with disabilities can talk to each other and also talk about the problems that they face safely? If not, why not? But that's the first thing always comes from building in, showing people that you value them and building in a space for them to be able to have those conversations, instead of saying, I don't really value you, I'm not going to pay you extra time, and I don't care if you talk about your things or not on my time, because that's my time. Disabilities. Oh yeah, and then the other part of my position is, I don't know how to say this, but yeah, so for example, like, two folks with disabilities, or identifying as having disabilities, you know, called me and said, like, I want to talk to you about these things because I don't think our practice is inclusive of folks with disabilities. So again, I'm constantly listening. I'm constantly trying to respond to what people are asking. I don't know what it's like to live with a disability, but I'm also I have the power to help people that do, and help people listen to them and then use it to change the things. I said this in the last session, I didn't say it in the session, I need to say it now, is that these sessions, or talking about equity, which I don't use that word ever, talking about diversity, I don't use that word either. When we talk about inclusion and all this stuff, often people just want to talk about it, they don't want to do anything about it. They want to keep their power, they don't want to give away their power, and they don't want to change. And talking isn't enough. Listening to me talking about it isn't enough. This is about action, this is about human relationships, again. So even though I'm talking about really good ideas, the point is that how do you listen to the people that you already work with, and how do you ask them what they need and then give them what they need within reason. That's really what I'm trying to say. Is yeah, there's all the stuff I'm doing, it's cool, but you know.
I think a lot of times we just don't ask.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, we just don't ask, and then, you know, just ask opinions, get feedback from people on, what's your take on this?
Yeah, and even not even having to do that, again, the general would be like every day knowing how someone's day went. If I asked you every day like how your day went, I would probably pick up a lot about what you didn't like, and that would inform me and being like, okay, she has to walk 2 blocks to get from the car park, from her parking spot to the agency. Maybe she doesn't like that. She said she doesn't like that, so I'm going to change that. So there's other ways of getting information that isn't like market researchy. It's just from being sensitive and paying attention to the needs. Yeah, and listening. And sometimes the question is there anything you'd like me to ask you? You know, because you don't always know the right questions to ask either. Yeah, and it's like if you can't figure it out now, do you feel okay talking to me later on? Am I approachable to you? If not, is there someone else that is more approachable to you? Then if so, then please speak to them and then they can tell me. So again, opening doors all the time and building in as many contingency plans as possible, because you know, everyone's just one person, but if you build it into the community culture and the work culture and say, hey, I value you all, we're a community, what we do matters and what we do affects other people, so we recognize that. If someone makes a mistake, it's probably because we built that into the culture, so we need to look at each mistake as a community problem. So again, approaching it collaboratively always, and then taking responsibility also collaboratively when something happens, as opposed to like, that's not my problem, that's your problem. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, sorry. So this is a totally different subject, but I think it fits in.
Yeah.
So as I said, I'm in radio.
Yes, I was going to bring it back to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
The different subject is the deaf community.
Yes.
The deaf community basically cannot listen to radio for the most part.
Yeah.
And I recently met a man who is deaf, and he's interested in my radio program.
Okay.
And he mentioned the first time, very briefly, that there's a translator. Does anybody know anything about how the deaf community can access radio? Can actually? get it?
Yeah, I don't
TTL?
know. Huh? It's TTL, yeah. But I only use it for websites. I don't use it for radio. But yes, I did want to talk about this a little bit in terms of radio, but also in terms of interns and volunteers and all that stuff. Miles Sebastian is a local deaf artist who is putting on the Deaf Arts Festival. I don't know if you already know about it. If you don't, please go. It is, obviously a way to look at art and look at even sound art and deaf approaches to music. It's a way to kind of look at that from a different perspective.
What's his name?
Miles, Myles, DE Bastion.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. But he also is very collaborative and he's very open. And if you find him, he loves answering questions. I'm volunteering him because he said that to me. He's like, he does a public calendar and you just set a time to meet him and you show up and you get to meet him and hang out with him and ask him questions. But yeah, he's very collaborative in that way. Similarly, I am too. But yes, like when I talk about language, I mean also deaf language. I mean ASL, American or other SLs. And I think that mobility isn't a thing that I always talk about, like being chronically ill or chronically in pain or not mobile enough to leave the house. And I always try to engage with folks that I know are interested in doing something and learning something, but I know they can't leave their bed right now, so I'll go and show them the same thing like in their house. So kind of just reframing, like not everyone can walk through the door all the time, and if not, but you know that there's someone that's interested, or if you want someone to be interested, how do you build in that inclusion from the offset? This is in part of one of my trainings, so I won't go through it completely, but Portland and Oregon is not just because of its racist history and anti-black history, but because it's built as a very middle class, like when it started it was like opportunity and like only people could afford to were here. So it's built, and because of Portlandia, it's built as a very white, very privileged, very middle class, hip town, right? And because of that, from the beginning of when I lived here, it's because of all this fiction that's not real, it's fiction, about the city, people forget to think about who they're not letting in the room. So like when they invite people to something, when they write a news article, when they do something on the radio, people constantly forget who they're not addressing. And I want everyone to reflect on that when they like advertise for interns or volunteers, or when they put a radio show on. First of all, who are the guests on your radio show? What music are you playing on the radio show? Is it all white artists? Is it all North American artists? If so, why is that the case? And then are you putting out the invitation to folks outside of your own network and your own understandings of community? And is this going to be understood by someone who doesn't know all the jargon and the acronyms that I'm using, for example? But yeah, I always ask people to I get it, people just know what they've learnt, and they don't necessarily know all the stuff that they haven't lived. But North America is a very navel-gazing nation. People always talk about these communities in America. This is the worst in America, and I'm like, what about this? Is we live in a globe with a lot of different nations, but media especially only reports about what's happening in North America usually. So again, how do you open your own perspective and think about, well, we have a bunch of immigrants living, and you want them to come here, but then we don't report it on their own culture, or we don't report on their home country, and we don't talk about them at all. We just pretend that this is the only country that exists. So again, how is that exclusive? Yeah.
Why don't you all learn English?
Yeah. Why don't you learn English, or like why aren't you interested in this thing that's really cool to me, but it's not cool to anyone else? And my analogy for this is when Trump was elected. Like the day after Trump was elected, everyone's like, this is so shocking to me. I can't believe how racist things are going to be. And that was mostly middle-class white people, because everybody else was like, are you surprised? One, are you surprised? Two, this has been my entire life. Like people of color and working class people were like, my entire life has been difficult. This is not going to, like, yes, this is going to be maybe worse, but you've never seen my experience. You've never listened to my experience. And now you get it because it finally hit your backyard. So again, always opening up your perspective and being like, okay, maybe gentrification hasn't happened in my neighborhood, but it has happened in other people's neighborhoods, so it's still worth talking about and still worth addressing. Any other questions? I think we only have 8 minutes left. I think there's a lot I haven't said because I think I'm very good at responding to specific questions, especially specific examples or scenarios, but I'm not very good at being like, these are the things that I've done, because I'm doing a million things at once all the time, so I can't like talk about them like very orderly.
You made me think about a lot of things, like situations that have happened in our workplace. Like, for example, we had a woman come in the other day who's been a volunteer with us for a long time. She's a wonderful artist. She's in a wheelchair. She's quadriplegic. Or paraplegic.
Yeah.
She is from Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
She's hard to understand. She has a very strong French accent,
Mm-hmm.
and she's had a really difficult time because of a lot of health problems.
Yeah.
Her getting in there to the studio is difficult for her, and so she had found this app on her phone that she thought that she could combine using this with using some of our studio equipment, and that she could more easily create shows for us, but do more of it from home, so she wouldn't have to come in, because it's like 2 hours on the bus for her to come in.
Oh my god.
And I thought, oh my god, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And the first person she talked to said, oh, I don't know if we can do that. You'll have to talk to this guy. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
You know, and it's somebody that reports to me, so I,
Yeah.
you know, so it's something I'm dealing with. But it's hard to get people to get it out of their heads that they can
Right.
open up a little bit.
So that's why I talk about community and I talk about work culture, because I'm constantly talking about consistency with everybody, and sometimes that means mandatory training, sometimes it means having very honest conversations, which I've also noticed that Portland is not very good at having very clear, honest communication and conversations around being racist or around being exclusive specifically. So yes, so if everyone was on the same page, and then is more likely to have that person is more likely to have a positive response. That is one out of hundreds and thousands of examples of people being denied by programs or finding barriers. So the two things I wanted to talk about was, one, what barriers exist to people who want to get involved with your group or with your station. Why do they exist? Do they need to exist? Can you do it with less barriers? Can it only just be a phone call? If they want to join the board, or if they want to have a show, can they just call in and it be done? Do you really need their background checks? Do you really need their history and their, So that those looking at, I always talk about zero barriers. Zero is not realistic, but there's low barriers as possible. Because most barriers are only there for a bureaucratic reason. So they're only there because of reporting or grants or some like other weird accountability tool, metric tool, but it's not usually, you don't really need to know their social security number for them to come into the station, do you? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, do you need to e-verify a volunteer? Do you need to out them as an undocumented worker? Like, all those things. So one, eliminate barriers, but really imagine what barriers could be if you were not yourself. And then two, respectability politics is huge in media. What that means is the expectation that people sound a specific way, look a certain way, and act a certain way to be valid media reporters or to be on radio or video. So dismantle all the expectations people have of like being conventionally attractive or being presentable. What does presentable mean? That's just a word that describes our understanding of the word presentable, but that's always different to every single person. So again, do you only expect people to talk a certain way? And if so, who is that excluding? Is that going to exclude everyone else that, one, maybe learn English after another language, two, maybe speaks louder because that's their cultural norm is just speak louder? Does that mean that they're not suitable for radio or suitable for your like quiet talk show or whatever? So again, really dismantle respectability politics and all those kind of culturally centered, like ethnocentric, like self, congratulatory practices. Are we only just letting people in that look and sound like us, or look and sound like the way that I expect them to? Why can't media look a different way? Why can't it sound a different way? And if you have a reaction to that, then look at that reaction more than, instead of just saying no to the person. So yeah, I just want to be clear about that, because people talk about legibility a lot and like well, it's hard to understand their accent. Well, then you as a media body can do things to translate or to make them accessible, but that's not their, don't make them, don't kick them out of your building just because you don't think that there's more you can do. Did you have a question?
Yeah, related to that, it reminds me of the, I have a couple of volunteers, recent volunteers at the radio station that aren't fully verbal.
Yes.
And my concern is making sure that the safest space for them, the space is safe for them in terms of their interactions with other volunteers,
Totally.
and the other staff internally.
Totally.
Do you have any advice or
Yeah.
or
So it
thoughts?
depends on the person always.
Sure.
But as a social worker, I mirror anyone that's walking through the door. So if someone is not verbal with me, then I won't be verbal with them. If they're using hand signals, I'll use hand signals. Sometimes if I know people that there's deaf folks or there's mute folks around, I'll like have a little pad and we just write to each other and we write what we're saying to each other. But yeah, it's always about meeting people where they're at, right? So I don't know them specifically, but for example, with my students who are on the spectrum, they respond to visuals really well. So like stop as a logo means 1,000 times more than me being stop it, stop, please stop. You know, they don't respond to that. So if I know that about my students, then I have a color coded thingy. So I just point to the thing and like that's how they respond. But yeah, it just depends on the person. You mean that they are somewhat verbal but not
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So then again, learning their signals or learning their language for different things. Also, no looks different in different cultures. Yes looks different in different, like I lived in Nepal for a year and people, this is kind of no. This is kind of a yes, it's kind of a no, but it means like they're not comfortable with it. But I was like 20 and I was like, yes, no, wait, I don't know what you're saying. But then I realized like it's kind of like, you know, in some cultures there isn't the word no, but so they have to communicate in a different way to say I don't want to do that. But it's rude to say, just straight out say I'm not comfortable, I don't have the capacity to do that. So yeah, understanding all of those things, not just what you see and what they present, but the kind of context and cultural framework around all the things that are coming to you. Yeah. Cool. I think we're out of time. Was there any last questions or comments? It's Friday afternoon, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you
You're
very much.
officially free. Thank you.